Amen. Hey, so we're going to start a new series today, and it's simply called this, It Matters. Someone say, It Matters. It matters. And what we're going to talk about over the next 4 weeks is living life on purpose. And man, you might think about that, and maybe you don't think about that, but I would venture to say that not everyone is living life on purpose. And what we want to communicate through this series is that it matters. Your life matters. The person sitting next to you matters. The person who is not sitting next to you, that needs to be sitting next to you, they matter. And life matters, and life has purpose, and it has meaning. And what we want you to catch through this is that it matters. And if you have a Bible with you today, I want to invite you to open up to the book of Ecclesiastes. And throughout this series, we're going to be touching down in the book of Ecclesiastes. If you are an A+ student and you do the extra credit work, I want to invite you over the next 4 weeks to read the book of Ecclesiastes. And just do yourself a favor and read the entire book of Ecclesiastes. And it'll give some context to what we're working through as we kind of frame out this series. But we're going to ask the question, what does it look like to live life on purpose? And the main kind of point that I want to thread through all 4 weeks of this series is that everyone is living an existence, but not everyone is living a purpose. And I shamelessly will say I have taken this statement from a great mentor in my life who's communicated this time and time again, that everyone is living an existence, but not everyone is living a purpose. How many of you guys are breathing this morning? All right, some of you guys are barely breathing, but you're here. If you are alive and breathing, you are living an existence, but not all of us are living a purpose. And Scripture has a lot to say about this, and what Scripture tells us is that it matters. The way that you live your life, the way that I live my life for Jesus, or not for Jesus, has consequences, and it matters. And the book of Ecclesiastes, we're going to spend a lot of time reflecting on this. The book of Ecclesiastes, if you've never read it before, it's one of the most paradoxical books of the entire Bible. In fact, it's probably one of the most depressing books of the Bible, depending on which way you choose to read it. And if you're searching an answer to this question, why does it matter? It's going to, on the surface, appear like Ecclesiastes is not very encouraging. This is not a therapist you'd want to pay more money to and go back to see a second time. Because what the book of Ecclesiastes says over and over again, and maybe you know where I'm going, is that it is meaningless, which is kind of the opposite of the name of this series, is that it matters. But what the book of Ecclesiastes screams more than 40 times throughout the book is it is meaningless. Not only it, but everything we do under the sun, everything that is observable in human behavior, in life, and choices is meaningless. And so how do we go from it is meaningless to somehow it matters? And that's what I'm going to venture to say is what is the beauty of the book of Ecclesiastes. Is that in the middle of everything, all of this meaningless, somehow it still matters. In the fact that all these choices that we can make, where you're going to eat lunch after church today, how much money you gave one grandkid for Christmas over the other grandkid, it's all meaningless, and yet somehow it still matters. And the word meaningless is an interesting word that we're going to break apart as we look at this, but one more time together, I want you to say, it matters. And so what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about life. Some of you guys need to ponder this a little bit. We're going to talk about life. And I'm going to butcher the quote because I'm staring at Steve. I was just reminded. Steve preached about 6 months ago, and I'm going to misquote it horribly, but he was explaining the difference of a person in their 20s, a person in their 60s, and a person in their 80s. And it was just a really funny story. And I'll go back and rewatch the message so I can tell you what he said next week. But it's really good. But how many of you guys know your perspective changes over time? And regardless of what your perspective is, what you need to realize is that what you do matters. And this life matters, and living life on purpose matters. And what I want to communicate is this, is that there are three things that we can do with our life. We can spend it. How many of you guys are big spenders? You like to spend? How many of you guys, your children are big spenders for you? They like, yeah, okay, they like, my daughter's starting to figure out how spending money works. And a lot of times, it's funny because Grady's brother-in-law, Trevor, has a daughter that would say similar things to her, and I used to laugh, and now my own daughter's saying similar things, and I'm like, oh, this isn't so funny on the other side. But his daughter would come to me, and she would always say, when Daddy gets his next paycheck, and then she would tell me all these things that she had plans for with Daddy's next paycheck. And my daughter's catching on. She's observed going to the bank. She was asking really, I have a sharp 4-year-old, just want to put that out. We were going to the bank, and I was putting money in the bank, and she's seen me take money out of the bank, but I didn't take money out. And she said, why did you go to the bank? And I said, well, I'm putting money in it. And she's like, well, why would you put it in? I thought we went to get money from the bank. I said, yeah, but first you have to put the money in the bank in order to take something out of the bank. And so she was asking many times after church on Sunday, if it's a good Sunday, we'll go out to eat with somebody or we'll go to a restaurant. Sometimes when the bank account's looking a little thin, we'll say, hey, not today. We're going to save our money for groceries this week, and we're not going to go out to eat this morning. And sometimes, we probably could spend money, but I just choose to tell my child, we don't have money for that today. And we can't go to the restaurant because Daddy doesn't have enough money to go to the restaurant. And so she started telling me, she told me this week actually, and she's sick this morning, so she's not with us, but she said, Dad, maybe you could save your money so that after Path Church on Sunday, we could go to a restaurant. And so there's three things we can do with our life. Is we can spend our life, we can waste our life, or we can invest our life. And whether you spend, you waste, or invest really depends on how you answer this question is, what is my purpose? What is my purpose? In order to live a life that matters, you have to live a life on purpose. Or I'd venture to say you have to live life on purpose. And determining what your purpose is and how you choose to live your life will determine whether or not you are spending your life, you are wasting your life, or you are investing your life. And so what does it look like to live life on purpose? And there's three things that we've all been given. And there's more than three things, but there's three things in this series that we're going to talk about. And they're time, resources, and pleasure. Time, resources, and pleasure. And all of these, we either spend them, we waste them, or we invest them based off of what we determine our purpose to be. Our time can be spent, our time can be wasted, or it could be invested. Our resources, which in American society really comes back to our money and our means of living and survival. Our resources can be spent, they can be invested, or they can be wasted. And let me tell you, I've wasted money more than once in my life. I've spent money more than once in my life. And other times I have invested money. I learned this morning, if I ever want to make a bet, I'm going to take Nancy with me. Nancy took a guess at my height this morning. She said, what are you, 5'8"? I said, man, you got that on exact measurement. And so I don't know if you've ever been to the fair and they ask you, like, how much weight do you think this is? And the person who gets the closest wins something. I told Nancy I'm going to bring her to the fair with me, and you can just make all the decisions for me. But we can spend life, we can waste it, or we can invest it. With our time, we can spend it, waste it, or invest it. Our resources can be spent, they can be wasted, or they can be invested. And the last one that we don't often think about is this, is pleasure, is joy, is where we find enjoyment. And the Ecclesiastes teachings has a lot to say about this, of where we find pleasure and where we find enjoyment, and what is our source of happiness, of great joy. And joy in itself can be something that we can spend, we can waste it, or we can invest it. And so we're going to talk about what it looks like to live life on purpose, because it matters. And man, I don't know if you've ever had a time in your life, you've done something, you thought it was a great idea, and some of you guys are chuckling already. at the end, it just didn't really matter. You're like, that was a total waste of my life. How many of you guys know you don't get hours back, right? Because time is a resource, and you can either spend it, waste it, or invest it. And once hours are spent, you don't get them back. And as told by the story of getting my hair, if you pressure me enough, I do give in to peer pressure at some point. And some of you guys are, yeah, it's okay. All right, confession, I got my hair cut of my own will, but Grady did make fun of me a lot. So I used to live in the beautiful state of Washington. I used to think it was a beautiful state until I moved to Southern Oregon. Then I realized you have this thing called sunshine. And, you can take half the landscape, but put that yellow ball up in the sky, and it changes everything. And so when I was born, my family came from a ministry family. We we're born and raised in Renton, Washington. It's a suburb of Seattle, Washington. And then my family, eventually the Lord kind of shifted what we were doing, and we moved to the crazy place called Modesto, California. And spent many years, my early teenage years in middle school and high school in Modesto, California. And I guess early elementary school is probably where this takes place. I was the new kid on the block. I don't know if you've ever been the new kid before, but my family had moved from one school in Washington, and I was the new kid in like fourth or fifth grade up here in Washington. And people started to notice things were a little different about me. Primarily, I had a lot of freckles, and my skin was very translucent white. And because in California, there's a very strong culture of either you already have dark skin or you get dark skin. People have subscriptions and payments and monthly visits to this thing called sun tanning. And where I live is very important that you look the part and that you tan year-round. And there was this girl in my class giving me a hard time because she just like didn't get it. She's like, "Why are you so pasty? Like, why are you white? You're like, it's kind of gross, And maybe it doesn't mean anything now, but as an elementary school kid, I was like, I don't fit in, And there's something that I learned really early on that I should have known better, but I relearned it again in this instant, is that I don't tan. I don't know, does anyone else in this place not tan? Okay, yeah, I don't tan. And so this girl was pressuring me, and she said, yeah, you need to tan. And so summer was coming out. My friend had a pool in the backyard, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to get tan this summer. And as a pasty white boy, I've come to the conclusion that in order to get tan, you have to first burn. Because a sunburn eventually turns into a tan, and that's just how the circle of life works for people with my complexion. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to lay out in the sun, and I'm going to get tan. But first, I'm going to have to burn. But I've had some poor experiences in life being burned, and it doesn't feel very good. And other parts are more sensitive than others. So I didn't want to get burned up here, so I just put a tiny dab of sunscreen. And but nothing else. I'm gonna make sure to burn and to tan everywhere else. So this is great. I just put a little bit here, a little bit here, and I laid out in the sun for a good hour, baking in the California heat. It's probably a good 100 degrees outside, and I'm just laying there toasting like a lobster. And at some point, 100 degrees is a little hot. And I just say, you know what, I'm just going to dip in the pool for a quick second, and cool down, and then I'm going to lay on the other side. So that's what I did. And then I came, and I laid on the other side for about an hour. And then I needed to see if I was successful. So, with the pain of this new sunburn that I had, I inched my way to the bathroom to look in the mirror. And to my horror, jumping in the water had caused all of that to spread around a little bit. So I had the weirdest looking blotches of it's, kind of, and this is all white. And then point of the story, sunscreen really does work. And so then I had an even horrible realization, and I went, man, this is going to be really rough, because what happens if you tan is that the white part's going to stay white, and the rest, so the whole summer, I'm going to be walking around with this awkward, staring myself in the mirror. And to my horror, 3 months later, sunburns healed up, look in the mirror, everything is even to the original color. I did not tan a pigment. Not at all. So I got the worst sunburn of my life for no purpose whatsoever. I guess maybe my purpose in doing it was I wanted to fit in. But instead, I just put myself through like the worst torturous sunburn I've ever had in my life. And what I learned is it didn't really matter. That was a pretty good waste of my summer. And there's a lot of things I couldn't do that summer because of the sunburn that I had. And we can waste life, we can spend it, or we can invest it, but we need to know this, is that what we do matters. And if you invest yourself in what doesn't matter, you will actually find yourself wasting your life. And Scripture in no way has invited us to waste our lives, but wisdom in the book of Ecclesiastes would tell us that your life matters. And so I want to look at the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 1, verse 2. It starts out with this encouragement here. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Man, how many of you guys just want to take that cup of joy and go home this morning? Everything is meaningless, and it doesn't get better. If you continue to read the book, he observes all the choices that are made and the investments, and over again he goes, but all of us share the same fate, and it is meaningless. Over 40 times this word meaningless is communicated through the book of Ecclesiastes, and yet paradoxically, in all of this meaningless, somehow it matters. And if you look up the word in Hebrew for meaningless as it's communicated in the book of Ecclesiastes, it maybe feels a little bit better. It doesn't help a ton, but it helps a little bit when you recognize what he's really communicating is this. The Hebrew word for meaningless is havel, and it simply means vapor or smoke. Vapor or smoke. And man, if you've ever seen vapor before, you see it for a moment and then it disappears, or smoke is here, but it dissipates. I'm looking forward to the smoke Easter morning when we cook tri-tips again, and it just all is in here. See, it's good for a while, but you come back next week, and it won't be here. Smoke, vapor, meaning it's here for a little bit, and then it's gone. And I don't know if you've ever, grasped to try to grab onto smoke or water, or though you can see it, you can't really tangibly hold it. And he's communicating something about life in front of us, is that life is but a vapor. Life is here for a moment and then it's gone. And what we need to realize in that is that if life is here for a moment and then it's gone, then the way I spend my time matters. The way I invest my joy matters. The way I use my resources or I don't use my resources, I can spend, I can waste, or I can invest. It all matters, because our days are numbered. And this brings us to a point of wisdom to recognize that life actually matters. And in the middle of this message that life is temporary and it's fleeting, among all things, it's meaningless, the teacher in Ecclesiastes also says this in Ecclesiastes 3, verse 11 through 14. Yet God has made everything beautiful for its own time. He planted eternity in the human heart. But even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. So I conclude there is nothing better than to be happy and to enjoy ourselves as long as we can. And people should eat and drink and enjoy the fruits of their labor, for these are gifts from God. And I know that whatever God does is final. Nothing can be added to it or taken away from it. God's purpose is that people should fear him. And it's really interesting to look in this passage, and I think oftentimes with purpose we ask the wrong question. We're asking what our purpose should be or what purpose we want to live for without realizing that God himself has created a purpose for you. God has a purpose for you, and that purpose matters beyond whatever purpose you think that you should have. Because God has placed eternity in the heart of humanity, and he has a purpose, and his purpose is what? Is that man would fear him. And we'll break that down here in a little bit, but what I want you to know is this, is that God has an eternal purpose for you. God has an eternal purpose for you and for me, and his purpose matters. His purpose is not meaningless. His purpose is not but a smoke or a vapor. His purpose is eternal, lasting forever. And his purpose for you matters. Ecclesiastes also says it like this, stated again in chapter 12, 13 through 14. It says, "Here now is my final conclusion. Fear God and obey his commands. For this is everyone's duty." Turn to the person next to you. Say, this is your duty. If anyone laughed, you know where their maturity level's at this morning, all right? So, fear God and obey his commandments. This is every person's duty. This is our obligation. For God will judge us for everything we do, including every secret thing, whether good or bad. See, our purpose, our eternal purpose as gifted by God is this, is that we should fear him and we should obey his commandments. Now, I venture to see how far back you remember my preaching, but what does that sound like? Shema, right? And in the Shema's we studied for 8 weeks and 8 weeks more within our small groups. Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 5 says this, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your strength." Our purpose, and so many times we are searching for purpose. You ask any high school student what their plan is after high school. Everyone is searching for purpose, and that purpose might change 3 or 4 times. Or, man, some of you guys have younger ones that want a Christmas present. What they want changes 3 or 4 times. How many of you guys know that what we want isn't always what we need? And what we reach for, it just is hevel. It's vapor, it's smoke. Our desires don't last. But there's something that does, and it's this word called purpose. Someone say purpose. And God has placed purpose in the creation of man, in the human heart. And his purpose is this, is that we would fear him and that we would obey his commandments. Now, if you look at the Shema, because we're asked, man, what is the greatest commandment? What are the Lord's commandments? Well, Jesus quotes the Shema, and he says the greatest commandment is this: love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all your strength. Now, dig into that verse a little bit and tell me where it says what job you're supposed to have, how many children you're supposed to have, where you're supposed to live, what car you're supposed to drive, how much money you're supposed to make, how many girlfriends you have to date before you find the right one. It doesn't answer those questions, but what it does answer is the thing that matters most is our purpose, is that we would love him and we would obey his commandments. And too many times we're searching for what, and what I would say is we're wasting our time looking for what, because in the end, it doesn't really matter. In the end, it doesn't matter how much money you had in retirement to leave behind for your children. Now, I'm not saying it's meaningless. There's value. Part of that value depends on how you raise your children. There's value in our time. There's value in our resources. There's value in enjoying the life that we've been gifted. But in the end, it doesn't matter if I rode motorcycles or I drove a Ford or a Chevy or I work my life as a pastor or I work. What matters is that I obey the Lord in what I do. And if obeying the Lord leads me to the calling of living out my life as a pastor, then that is for me, to obey the Lord with all my heart, with all my soul, and with all my strength. But whether you make things in a factory or you want to be a Fortnite gamer when you grow up, it's a really popular video game right now. If you got to remember who my audience is out here. So what you grow up to do doesn't really matter. Where you go to college, it doesn't really matter. Man, this is so much placed a heavy burden on ourselves in our humanity. We want to do something that matters, and we search for things in life that matter. And really, the only thing that matters is this, is that you love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul and all of your strength. And look, if you can play video games the rest of your life and love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your strength, man, that's a life that matters. And some of you guys laugh, but man, some of the biggest banging careers right now that make a lot more money than I do are making video games. I wanted to be an audio engineer. That's what I wanted to do with my life, and I won't get into my whole story this morning, but I had a plan for my life and things that I wanted to do until God told me to do something else. And my parents said, well, in doing that something else, you probably should have a backup plan. You probably should have a fallback plan. And they're not wrong. Like I said, I waited to cut my hair until I found out if I'd be fired or not, I want to play it safe, but I told my parents, no, very specifically, when the Lord called me to do what I'm doing, he told me not to pursue anything else. Because if I did, I wouldn't be obedient to the thing he was asking me to do. See, that's my story, and that's my life, and that's what I have to live out in my fear of the Lord and my obedience to him. What you do looks differently, but the important thing is this, is his purpose and his eternal purpose for you matters. And his purpose is this, is that you would fear him and you would obey his commandments. And I think a lot of times, I don't know if you guys have seen one of these before, Magic 8 Ball, anybody? If you don't have one of these in your home, it settles a lot of arguments. Are we having pizza for dinner, or are we eating the thing that I don't like? Let's see. Ooh, come on. Yes, definitely. Yeah. So is Grady really my best friend? Well, let's find out. Concentrate and ask again. A lot of things can be determined if you ask the right questions. The problem is, though, we treat life kind of like a Magic 8 Ball. And we put a lot of emphasis and a lot of effort into making decisions that really don't matter in light of eternity, in light of the one purpose, the one life. And this isn't in my notes, and it's kind of cliche, but you could write it down. You only have one life. And that's why it matters. Because you have one life, and you can spend it, or you can invest it, or you can waste it. And a lot of times we're wasting our life coming to the Magic 8 Ball, asking, man, what should I do? Should I keep this job? Should I marry this person? Should I? And it's not that some of those things don't demand an answer and that some of those things have some sense of purpose. But those things in and of themselves are not your purpose. The question instead we should be asking is, how will this decision in front of me lead me to fear the Lord and obey his commandments? And what you learn in the book of Ecclesiastes is that there's very little, and this needs to sink really deep this morning, there is very little that is in your control. Control is an illusion. This 8 ball is an illusion. And we spend so much of our life frustrated because we try to keep things in control that when you read the book of Ecclesiastes, it's amazing the wisdom in that book that applies just as accurately right now as it did thousands of years ago when it was written. Because there's wisdom in it. That very little of what you do in this life is in your control. Go back 2 years ago and we had this global pandemic, or so they say. Wherever you land, I'm not telling you conclusively which side you have to land on, but we could ask. It doesn't matter, but if COVID taught us anything, it's this, is we're not really in control. And if COVID was your first realization to learning that, man, just look a little deeper. Look a little further into the future. There is very little that you can control. Man, you can raise your kids to a moment, but you come to a point where you realize there's very little that's in my control. Man, you can invest in a retirement for a moment, but man, like a vapor, it's not guaranteed tomorrow. See, James doubles down on this wisdom. He says in James chapter 4, 13 through 17, look here, who are you to say today or tomorrow we're going to do a certain thing? We'll go to a town and we'll stay there a year. We'll do business there and make a profit. How do you know what your life will be like tomorrow? Your life is like the morning fog. It's meaningless. It's havel. It's smoke and vapor. It's here a little while, and then it's gone. What you ought to say, and man, in studying this, did these words mean something different than I used to read? If the Lord wants us to, then we will live and do this or that. Otherwise, you are boasting about your own pretentious plans, and such boasting is evil. See, I used to think what we ought to say is if the Lord wants us to, we will. And man, I used to think, man, that means I gotta, God, man, should I take this job, yes or no? Should I put my money here, yes or no? And it's the wrong question to ask. God's not really into specifics. Guarantee you, read any part of the Bible. God's not very good at giving specifics. Case in point, because some of you guys are wondering what I'm doing with the Bible this morning. So there's a man in the Bible named Abraham. God makes a promise to Abraham. He says, you're going to have a son. God doesn't say when he's going to have a son. Unfortunately for God, he didn't tell Abraham who he was going to have a son with. Some of you guys know the story, some of you guys don't. So years later, he doesn't have a son, so what does he do? He goes and finds his own way to conceive a son through another woman. Years later, God comes back and says, hey, that's not the son. We mess a lot of things up when we ask the wrong questions, when we focus on the specifics, rather than asking the question, what am I to do in fearing the Lord and obeying his commands? And that is the question, because purpose has more to do with why than it does to do with what. Purpose doesn't answer what, it answers why. And a lot of times we spend so much time trying to figure out what, when what we really need to figure out is why. Why am I making this choice? Why am I investing in this specific opportunity? Why am I going to go here or there? Why do I want to purchase a house rather than rent a house? Why should I do this career over that career? Why should I go to this college over this college? When you figure out why, it begins to guide the wisdom in your decisions. If these decisions will help you in following the Lord, fearing the Lord, and obeying his commands, then man, take the blessing, and that is a good, wise decision. But man, if investing in this activity or buying this thing is going to distract you, if you can't answer how that thing is somehow leads you in a deeper fear of the Lord and in obedience to his commandments, then you should probably pause and ask why you're doing it. Because it's not really about the what, it's about the why. My purpose, again, is to fear the Lord and to obey his commandments. And as depressing as the book of Ecclesiastes is, you can read it and find out, man, I spend so much time doing this and this and all these things that, how many guys just pause for a moment? I want you to think of something that you've done maybe even in the last week that just really mattered. If you have a hard time remembering, if you're married, just think about your spouse for a moment. That thing that you couldn't quit doing that you just had to do, and she said, why does it matter? And you said, I have to do this. And you just kept pushing anyways. What are the things that you find so much value in, that you invest so much time in? See, the thing is, we can find our purpose by looking at these three things I talked about. You'll spend it, you'll waste it, or you invest it. Where are you wasting your time? Where are you spending your time? Where are you investing your time? If you can answer that question for me, I'll tell you what your purpose is. I'll tell you what you have determined is the why behind your purpose. Because we worship and we give our lives to the things that matter most. And the thing that should matter most, the eternity placed within ourselves, is this, is to fear the Lord and to obey his commandments. And it can feel really meaningless to read the book of Ecclesiastes and go, man, it really doesn't matter. See, if I died tomorrow, I could try to puff myself up and say that it matters for something. But you're all going to remember me for about 25 years max if you really liked me. And after that, I'll be so far in a distant memory, they won't even write a history book about me because I didn't do something of enough significance. Some people make history books, some people don't. You could spend your life trying to make history, trying to be rememberable. But the book of Ecclesiastes says even those people, a couple generations out, nobody knows their name. What we do that we think has so much value, has so much significance, none of it actually matters. It's meaningless. And we can go, well, if Things are meaningless. Actually, here, real quick, I just want to go back to this verse in Ecclesiastes. It's interesting. Ecclesiastes 3:11 through 14. His encouragement says, and people should eat, drink, and enjoy the fruits of their labor, for these are gifts of God. If everything is meaningless, then why should I labor? Doesn't matter. Why should I try to get out of my mom's apartment and labor for my own house if it doesn't really matter? And that's a joke for some people and it stings for other people. Culturally, we've adopted this religion of nihilism, that nothing matters. And there's actually some truth to that, but we're missing that we were actually created for a purpose and that life does matter. But if you live in the belief long enough that nothing matters, that can take you into all kinds of dark places because what I do doesn't really mean anything. And the paradox is this, is that when you and I realize that nothing that we do is in our control, it causes us to surrender our life to the only person who is in control. We try to look for things in this life to find meaning and value and purpose and what should I invest in, what should I spend my money on, how should I spend my time, waste my time, do things with my life that matter, that make a difference. And we realize none of it matters because we didn't have control over any of it. And when we realize that we are out of control, we can come to seek and find and realize there is a person who is in control. There is someone who is Lord over heaven and earth and everything under the earth, who has created you with purpose, and his purpose matters. And when I can come to the conclusion, I think God looks down and he says, finally, you figured it out. Finally, you can stop going to whatever that thing is to get your answer. What do I got? How much longer should I keep preaching? The outlook is not so good. The longer I spend wasting my time on that to finally arrive to the conclusion that it doesn't really matter, I'll finally come to the conclusion that I need to invest myself into finding purpose from the one thing that does matter, the one person who is in control, the one person that controls my destiny and my purpose. And his purpose matters, and his purpose is simply this, is to fear God and to obey his commandments, because God has an eternal purpose for you and for me. See, everyone is living an existence, but not everyone is living a purpose. Things really come into focus when we read this verse that God has placed eternity on the human heart. And what you do here matters in light of eternity. And when we recognize wisdom from above, that the only thing that really matters is Christ and his purposes, we'll begin to find that we can actually live a life that matters. We can live a life that has purpose, that we've been created for something. And you and I have been created for worship, to fear the Lord and to obey his commands, because how I live my life matters. I want to read one quote from this book. And again, if you're a person that likes to do lots of homework, I read a lot of books, and I tell you guys to read books sometimes. So somewhere in the future of this year, I'll probably do a book study on this one and invite us all to read it. So if you want to read it ahead of time, and then you can be like, actually, I already read that. This is called One Life. It's Jesus Calls and We Follow. It's by Scott McKnight. And so I've been reading this recently. I just wanted to share this one passage with you this morning. And I'm going to invite Brittany and John to come up. We're going to close with a song today. A.J. Jacobs wrote a hilarious book that was at the same time serious. He called it The Year of Living Biblically. Jacobs is a secular Jew, but he wanted to see what it was like to live like a biblical Israelite. Then Ed Dobson in Grand Rapids decided to take up A.J. Jacobs' challenge and applied it to his life and the teachings of Jesus. His story is called The Year of Living Like Jesus. Since Jesus was accused of being a glutton and a drunkard or a wine imbibber by the leaders of his day, Ed decided to visit some bars. Ed described one bartender as a short Jamaican in his 50s, adding that he had a small mustache and was slightly gray. Ed, a follower of Jesus that he is, had let his beard grow according to the ancient biblical custom. And the bartender said, "I like your beard." And the bartender asked, "Why are you growing it?" Ed's response, I made a commitment on January 1st to spend the whole year trying to live like Jesus. So the beard is part of the gig. And if you guys want to know why I grow my beard this way. After some conversation, the Jamaican bartender says, dude, that's unbelievable. So what are you learning? The dialogue that follows is priceless, and I wonder if this is what comes to your mind when you think of following Jesus. Ed answered, I'm learning that trying to follow Jesus is a full-time job. I'm learning how difficult it actually is to follow his teachings. Bartender, so what's so hard about it? It's a great question. How about loving your enemies? How about caring for the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame? How about clothing the naked, visiting those in prison, visiting the sick and those feeling hungry, and giving water to the thirsty? Bartender, right on. I imagine the bartender asking you that question. What are you learning? We have a full-time job in our purpose in following Jesus, and it's simply this, is to fear God and to obey his commands. And what you determine is the purpose of your life will determine whether you spend your life, you waste your life, or you invest your life. But God has placed an eternal purpose on all of our hearts, is that our life really belongs to him. And when we invest in a life of following him and obeying commandments, we find purpose and meaning to the life that was created for us. That we have our purpose found within him, amen? And what we'll learn in that is that doing this is a full-time job. It's not something we can clock in on Sunday mornings and put in some hours and then go move on to something else. Because purpose is more than a job. Purpose is a way of living. It's a life. It's the choices that I make every moment of every day. When I go to bed at night, when I wake up the next morning, go back to the Shema. When you lie down, when you wake up, when you're on the road, when you're on the way. It's a full-time job to live and to follow Jesus. And it's a purpose that matters. And I just want to end the message this morning by saying this, it matters. And I want to pray for you this morning, and we're going to close out with a song. But I want you to reflect on the life you've been living. Man, am I living a life that matters? Am I living a life for an eternal purpose? And more importantly, man, am I spending my life? Am I wasting my life? Or can I find myself investing my life in the purpose that Jesus has for me? And so I want to pray this morning. And man, if you've never made this decision, maybe you're here and you're going, man, I don't think I've been doing things that matter all that much. I want to live this life of purpose. It's as simple as speaking to the Lord, saying, God, I want to fear you and I want to obey your commandments. And you commit the rest of your life, as the rest of us have, to learning the commands of the Lord and following him, because his purpose is for you to know him and to be with him. Amen? So Lord, we thank you for today. We thank you for your eternal purpose that beams down over us. And God, I pray today that you would put eternity into focus. God, the things that we hold on to, that we invest in, that we spend so much time achieving for, God, you would show us this morning that none of it really matters. God, that none of us are guaranteed tomorrow. So who are we to say and to make plans and to dream dreams beyond what you've called us to? God, what we ought to say is, if you will it. God, what we ought to say is, if we align our purpose with you, God, and we live a life of fearing you and obeying your commandments, a life of worship unto you, God, we will find ourselves living a life that matters. So God, give us the courage to do that today. And God, if we haven't done that, today would be this first step forward in asking this question, God, what does it mean to follow you, and surrendering ourselves to that eternal purpose? So God, for those that would want to receive that today, I just pray, God, it's not a prayer, it's not a moment. Salvation is not the words that we say, but it is the commitment of a life that follows you. So Lord, I just pray a simple word of surrender this morning. God, those that want this life for themselves would choose to surrender to you simply by saying, Jesus, I surrender. Jesus, I surrender to you today. God, that I would live a life to fear you, to obey your commandments. God, Give me courage to live a life that matters, a life of purpose. In your name I pray. Amen.